Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. In this video I want to show you a Games Workshop Realm of Battle board set. The customer requested that this set be finished in a pretty unusual color scheme. He wanted something very alien world feel with some very stark colors that are going to give it an off-world feel. Now, in the back and forth with the customer over this color scheme, I went out on the web and tried to find some alien world inspirational pictures, if you will, and I found one picture in particular that's fairly abstract, but I think captures a sort of alien world vision that we could apply to these boards. So let me show you that picture here. So when you take a look at that picture, what you see is something, with a lot of strong colors, greens, blues, yellows, that sort of motif. So what I wanted to do was try to take some of those colors and use them as a foundation for ideas to put onto these boards. So what I'm going to do is walk you through a few of the boards, show you some of their prominent features and color schemes, and then at the end I'll show you a few photos of all the boards put together. My lighting has shifted just a little bit as George broke one of my lights. So I'm running on a sort of auxiliary light here, but it's a little difficult to light the whole board set cleanly, so I'd like to just take the photos of it and then color correct them a little bit in post-editing. So let's take a look at the individual boards. Let me show you some of them, and then we'll take a look at those photos at the end. So here you can see one of the flat boards that contains the skull pits, and it gives you a good sense of the overall color scheme that I've gone with for the boards. So what I've done is I've basically based it in a blue. This is actually partially the color that I use for water, but I didn't want it to look like water, obviously. So what I've done is I've gone in with some burnt umber and just shifted it a little, and then brought up some of the highlights to a near white, but it's not white. I've actually gone in with some pearl, which is, oh gosh, I can't remember the full name of it, but it's sort of a metallicized iridescent pearl color. And I've highlighted a few of those areas with it, and hopefully I can capture that reflection when we do a little bit of a close-up. And around the rocky areas, and you'll see this in the next board as well, I've tried to go in and give them a greenish hue, trying to distinguish it from, the main board colors. And typically, of course, we do something like this in soil, and then we pick out the rocks in greens or in gray. So I wanted to try to capture that kind of a difference, but with something that's going to be a little bit more alien feel. So what I did is I went in with some sort of greens, again shifted with some burnt umbers to darken it, and then and you can see the gleam coming off of these edges here. I've gone in with that pearl color and really highlighted them quite strongly. I was hoping for a more iridescent effect, but the pearl is, like I said, a little metallicized, so it's given them a bit of a metallic look, but I think for an off-world, that's kind of a nice idea, right? That the rocks are almost like a metal or something like that. Then you can see, obviously, that I've gone in with some large reddish patches. The customer was mentioning something of this effect. And as I was doing them, I didn't want, okay, so here was the main thing I was going for. I didn't want the blue to look cold, and I didn't want the reds to look warm. I wanted something a little in between that, as this isn't really a frozen world, nor is it sort of a hot baking planet. So I went in with some sort of ruddy reds, and then just hit them with a little bit of a darker red as a final highlight in the centers to kind of give them a little bit of a more distinguished look. And then I left these actually unhighlighted, which gives kind of an interesting and I think effective contrast against the main boards as a whole, the main areas of the board, I should say. And then lastly, and again we'll come up on a close-up of that, but I wanted you to get an overall sense, the customer requested that I fill the pits with a water effect that is sort of, he kind of gave me a little freedom. Is it blood, or maybe a rusted, oxidized, reddish look, or something to that effect? So I actually went in and again, sort of shifted the red a little bit to brown. Now, in retrospect, that kind of almost looks a little bit like blood, but I think in person, and maybe in the close-ups, we'll see that it's really got quite a heavy amount of brown in it, rather than shifting it towards purple or something like that, which would give it a little bit more of a blood look. So that's the overall motif that I've gone with the boards, and we should take a look at a couple of close-ups at another board. So here's a close-up of one of the sections of the board. And here you can see, those red patches that have been sort of finally, I'm going to call it a highlight, even though it's almost a de-highlight, an anti-highlight, with that darker red patch in there. And what you see here is some of that metallicized highlighting. Now what I've done is gone in sort of patchy to just, you can see here there isn't any, up here there is some, and I'm hoping that this camera angle will capture some of the reflection and the gleam of it. It's a little hard to see in the screen that I'm looking at, so we'll see when I go into editing if that shows up. But I wanted to patchily, can I do that? Patchily highlight those metallics scattered around, which is sort of emulating, the outwash from the rocks, or, weathering or something of that nature. And to give a little variation, as these are very large flat areas, and, breaking up that monotone color, I think, helps to give it a little bit. So this is a very top-down look of the skull pit area. And here you can see the other one without quite as much reflection in it. And, I wanted to, as I always do, I wanted to de-emphasize the skulls and give it more of a very subtle impression. They're quite stark if you just paint them all up. But I did go in, I have to hand pick out every skull because I'm never quite sure how much of the depth that my tinting is going to reveal. So that's a bit of a pain. But in any case, it ensures that whatever I fill, whatever level I fill to and whatever tint I get, I'm going to, make sure that it all looks proper. But this color really came out very, very heavy in the water effect, and so it gives just the slightest impression of these skulls coming through. And the water effect is poured just to the top of the level, and I'll give you another camera angle in a second so you can see that maybe a little more effectively. I did give them a more of a, how do I describe it? A more non-glossy gloss. I used Mod Podge hard coat on this surface, as it's a little bit more durable than the normal Mod Podge, and its shine, it's glossy, but it's not super glossy. And I think that actually works really well for these, as it gives it kind of a very different feel than a typical water effect, yet still retains some of that reflectivity. And I think, again, with this kind of a unique board color scheme, I think that kind of differentiates it from a normal board as well. And we'll see. I'm going to shoot this from an angle, and we can see the painting of the stonework, I hope, a little bit better. But you can see I went in and I very heavily highlighted the edges of the stone and then faded that out, particularly along the cracks, to kind of give it that, the rocks are coming through the surface here, and it really helps to distinguish them from the other areas of the board. And here is a close-up of the skull pit, so you can get a sense of the depth of visibility through the liquid, whatever this liquid is on this world. But it really gives a very nice impression as these bottom skulls are just barely starting to come through, but some of them are, poking through. Perhaps they're floating to the surface midway, something like that. And lastly on this board, just the other skull pit, but most importantly, I think this angle captures that metallicized iridescent highlighting on these rocks a little bit better. So you can get a sense of that, hopefully a little bit better. And some areas, of course, you can see that reflection coming off a little bit more strongly here. So that is the sort of rock color scheme I've gone with on all the boards. and hopefully that green will come through. It's a little more prominent, I think, than what I'm seeing through this screen here on the camera, but we'll take a look in post-editing and see if that captures it. I think actually, there we go. Actually, from this angle, I think you can see how it's distinguished from the blue here. And before I babble on too much about this board, let's take a look at another one that shows it in a different light. And so here you can see one of the boards that features the Plateau edge here. Of course, that could be arranged in a variety of ways when you lay out the boards, and one of the stony paths that go up to it. And so you can get a sense, especially from this angle, that highlight that comes across on the rocks, but also captures some of that green contrast. The green is not super bright, and I was afraid of really making these boards look cartoony. That was something I really wanted to avoid. So I kept that green very subdued with a lot of brown mixed into it to kind of give it a more subdued look. So we'll take a close look at this cliff line and you can see that detail. And so here you can get a sort of panoramic shot of the cliff. A panning shot. This is not panoramic. You know, this metallic highlight actually shifts in terms of its visibility depending on the angle that you're viewing it at and the way it catches the light, which is kind of a nice effect, actually. I was surprised at how much I did like it once I started adding it, and then I actually went back over all the rock surfaces and brightened that up after I saw the effect it was starting to capture. It really, I thought, was much more effective than I originally expected it to be. So there you get a sense of what the path looks like up close. And one of these little corner pieces here with, of course, the obligate skulls that GW is so fond of adding. And here you can see another one of the boards. This is the one that has the 2 skull pits on it, along with the larger section of one of the Plateau pieces. And this, I think, angle actually highlights what I was just talking about on some of the other boards. Whereas, you know, here you can see some of that bright gleam. This is pretty close to the light, but also has a slightly different angle to it. And, you know, this piece here you can see not quite as reflective when viewed at this angle, whereas this is really facing us, and these sides are not quite facing us here. You can see that as well. And you can see it on this skull pit here, not very reflective from this angle, but when viewed from this angle, a little bit more of that metallicized look. And I think here too you can see that greenish tint that's been given to all the rocks a little bit more effectively as well. One thing I should also add is that this metallicized pearlescent color really was not staying on very effectively when I was doing some test rubbing on the surfaces to see if it was going to adhere well. It was a little bit loose, meaning that if I had a wet cloth I could begin to wipe off some of it. So I went over all the boards with a protective layer of gloss clear coat. Actually, this is Rust-Oleum gloss clear coat, which when given a light dusting did give a fairly good lockdown of the paint, but actually didn't look very glossy on the boards. Depending on the light strike, you know, you can barely see that it's been sprayed. But I was pretty pleased with that, as I didn't feel like, you know, Army Painter was going to give the right kind of protective layer, and once I had done the gloss coat, actually it seemed like that was enough on its own. Here you can see, depending on the angle, one of those little metallic strikes on the blue, but you know, here you get a hint of it. So it's very angle dependent and light dependent on how much of it comes through, which I think is kind of nice. It's a very unique effect, and I've never done anything quite like this before. So I was happily surprised to see that variation. And so as the last board we'll take a look at here is the board that has the, you know, the large stony path running along its middle section here. And it's just a final glimpse to get another sense of how this this large greenish rock area contrasts, you know, subtly contrasts with the other colors, you know, on the major flat areas of the board, and gives you another sense of how some of that red accent, you know, kind of pops out against this more highlighted blue. So, you know, a real challenge to paint these boards, very unconventional color scheme, and a nice challenge, I should say, to kind of break break all of us out of that normal mode of what these boards should look like, and I think gives you hopefully an idea of some alternatives that you could embrace. You know, hopefully the customer feels the same, and you know, should it need revisions, of course, you know, I'm happy to do that. You know, in our earlier discussions, you know, bringing out that blue as a highlight against a fairly dark background was a bit of a too much of a contrast. So going back in and base coating it with some heavy washes that would give it a more foundational blue to bring up those highlights, I think was much more effective and gives it a much richer look. So, you know, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. And if you want to see pictures of these boards, I will have them on the website in the custom gallery before I finish uploading this video. And you can take a look at those and see the entire board set, you know, all the boards that are involved. And I'll leave the end of this video with some pictures of the entire set laid out so you can see how they all work together to create a unified look. So thank you once again for joining me, and keep an eye on the channel. As I mentioned before, I have quite a few videos that I need to get up and a lot of photos that I need to edit for the website for a variety of pieces. So hopefully you'll come back and join me then for those. So I will talk to you soon.